So welcome back. So thank you for the introduction, and thank you for having me here today. So yes, I'm an analyst on the digital financial services research team at Forrester. I'm based in London, but I come from France, you can tell from my accent. And I want to share today some insights about what we're seeing in the financial services industry. I think that even if you're outside that industry, I think there's a lot of things you can learn. We've been talking about customer experience this morning. I will be talking also about digital transformation and how the two are really linked. So I want to start with this slide. I'm sure that most of you, if not all of you, are familiar with this slide. I think what it illustrates is really what we're seeing in the financial services industry, is that digital disruption is happening. So what we're saying is that banks, insurance companies, wealth management firms are being besieged by like a wave of new entrants, like disruptors, that are here to disrupt their industries. But what they're doing really is like using digital tools to provide just a better customer experience. And they're doing that at a fraction of the cost that incumbents do. Now, what is interesting is that when I'm talking to banks and insurance companies, what they see is digital as a threat. The technology. And what I tell them is like, digital disruption is not just about the technology. It's about the mindset. What these disruptors are doing, yes, they provide, like maybe an easier way, a cheaper way for customers to manage their financial services, their financial lives. But what they're doing really is relentlessly focusing on the customer. And rightly so. At first, we're talking about the age of the customer, and this is where we are now. And that's what these disruptors are doing, making sure that they put the customer at the center of what they're offering. So back in 2011, we've been talking about how the world has entered this new age, the age of the customer. And what we mean by that is that until now, companies in financial services, but also outside financial services, had the power. So the successful companies were the ones that were really good at understanding how to distribute their products, how to manufacture products. They also had like information mastery. But with digital, with access to digital technologies, that power that companies had is transferring to the customer. So the customer is being digitally empowered. He's got access to information. He's got the technology that allows him or her to be able to be better informed when he makes a decision about which product he wants to buy or which services he wants to get. So they have access to information. They have access to the price. They have access to the location. And we're seeing these digitally empowered customers causing this shift in the market. The customer decides today where he's going to do his shopping, with which brand he wants to interact. And the companies are losing that power. The customer decides who is going to be the winner, who is going to be the loser. And the forcing companies, putting the pressure on companies to evolve or to perish. And what we're saying at Forrester, I think it's, since the 1997, we've got access to data through our surveys, is that there's been a dramatic shift in customers' behaviors and attitudes. And they're changing in, I would say, like 5 ways. The first thing we're saying is that they're self-efficient. So as I said, they have information, they have access to information, to a lot of information, different options, and they like to have the control of this information. So they decide where they want to go. They're really good at also understanding that information. They have access to far more content than they had, like, let's say, 30 years ago. We're talking about 5 times more content that they consume. Rather than what they had over the past decades. So what's happening is that they have access to this information, but it's also easier for them to assess that information, to navigate the contents. They're getting far more information savvy. It's also about the devices. What we're seeing that customers have today, they have like a plethora of home technologies, of gadgets, of devices that they're using. I mean, even among you, I'm sure that if you're counting the number of devices you have at home, at work, that you're working with, that you're using to have access to information, to have access to companies and to interact with these companies, this is growing. And actually, if you're looking at the growth of devices, like production, it's going faster than the growth of humanity. So quite something. There's also something that I think we're seeing a lot of change, is that we're talking about digital touchpoints and physical, like stores, for example, offline, online, but actually I think the line between those two is actually narrowing, and the customer actually doesn't see so much difference today when he's having a customer experience, when he's interacting with a company. For the customer, this is just one customer experience, whether it's online or offline, on a digital touchpoint or in a store. And interestingly, the mobile phone, when you're thinking about it, is not so much like an independent channel these days. That's actually the orchestrator of that customer experience. And something that I think is also very important is that customers are willing to try new things faster. So we're in, I call it like the age of hyper-adoption, right? So customers, in the past, maybe it was a bit difficult to, get to interact with a new brand because you need a new device, so you have to download the app. But this is actually becoming easier and easier. And actually, the rate of adoption and also the rate of abandonment is skyrocketing at the moment. So why is that important? Well, it's because I think like business executives think that customers, when they buy products, when they get services, they think that they have a very rational way when they make decisions about what kind of products they want to buy. But this is not so much about the product anymore. Like customers actually, these days, I think are going for experiences. They want to interact with a brand that understands who they are, that understands what they're trying to achieve, and that is offering products and experiences that meet their needs in the moment of need. And when I say in a moment of need, I think it's also because mobile engagement has raised the urgency for contextual experiences. So we're seeing like a mobile mind shift in a way. So customers are so used to have this device in their hands so that when they want something, as I said, in a moment of need, they take their phone and they want to have access to information, to content, in real time, in their moment of needs, and is actually meeting their needs. And this is, these are the experiences they're getting with brands outside financial services. This is reshaping the way they want to interact with any company these days. So to go back to customer experience and why a solid, great customer experience is so important. Well, it's because it is driving business growth. And if I say that, you might say, yeah. How? Well, what is customer experience? It's very simple. A good customer experience is when a customer interacts with a brand and the interaction, the experience he has with that brand is easy. It's easy to make business with that company. It's also effective, so that means that it meets his or her needs. And we're talking also about emotion, because that experience has to be emotionally engaging. It has to be fulfilling. And this is important. I think there's a number of companies that forget, I think, that element about emotion. You remember earlier I was talking about the experience. The customer is going for an experience. So you have to factor in emotion. And why customer experience is so important? Well, because we know that improving customer experience is leading to loyalty, to customer loyalty. So what does that mean? That means like good CX correlates with customer loyalty. That means that your customer is more likely to do business with you, to stay with you as a brand, to bring business to you. Your customer is more likely to make another purchase, to buy something else from you, products or services. Your customer is more likely to recommend you to a friend, to a family member, to a colleague. And this is what is driving revenue. So what we do at Forrester is we're trying to understand what is the ROI of CX improvement. So how good customer experiences can actually boost your bottom line, can generate revenue. So we have what we call the CX index methodology. So this is that measurement. And what we say, what our research reveals, is that actually when you improve that CX index score, that drives revenue. And here I'm taking the example of retail banks, since I work in financial services. And what our research shows is that for each 1 point improvement in the CX index score, there's an annual incremental revenue per customer of $8.27. That's for US American banks. If you multiply by the average number of customers, it's a lot of money. So I think earlier on the panel, we're talking about customer experience and how do you get executive buy-in, talking about customer experience. It generates revenue. But now this is the problem. So this is a survey from April 2017. When we asked business technology decision makers in financial services what is their priority for the company, improving the experience for customers is a priority, also high or critical priority for 68%. This is the third priority after generating revenue and improving products and services. So CX is not a priority. And why is it not a priority? Because it should be. So when we talk to digital banking, digital insurance executives, and we ask them about what they're trying to do in their company, they talk about customer experience. They talk about, obviously generating revenue, about their digital transformation. But when you ask them what they mean by digital transformation, what does digital mean to them? Actually, what I hear is that they want to digitize the whole customer lifecycle, like end to end. So it's about having digital sales, digital services, 100%. And this, I think, is a problem. And they focus on the digital capabilities that they want to develop. It's about, the new app, kind of maybe improving the websites, maybe tomorrow doing a chatbot. But it's not about customer experience. It's not about improving the customer experience across touch points. So the problem is that they tend to focus on the digital, in a very tactical way, on the digital touch points, rather than looking holistically at the whole customer experience across touch points. So there's a lack of focus on the customer, but I think there's also a lack of understanding as a company, how do you change the way you operate in order to deliver better customer experience. So the problem very often when I ask about their digital strategy is that digital strategies are too inside out. And what I mean by that is that it's often driven by other priorities than customer obsession. It's often driven by enterprise-wide focus on ROI and cost cutting. So how can we cut costs maybe by digitizing, trying to go paperless, etc. Not talking about the customer experience. It's very often directed by lines of business fixated on specific products or functionality. What we see is that the digital teams, they're there to manage the touch points. But when we're asking them about who generates ideas in terms of functionality, in terms of content, that comes from the lines of business. And bear in mind, on the business side, they have P&L, they have products, focus. So the ideas that they come with, kind of biased. It might be a way to help them with their sales goals. They're not focused on the customer experience. They have other priorities. And digital strategies are also disconnected from customer and employee needs and expectations. We are talking about employee experience earlier today. Again, I think that you ask them, what are you trying to do? And what they're trying to do is making sure that the customer can use digital end to end. So, they can look for information about the financial products on our website, and then they can manage, the finances via the app. Or, on the insurance side, it can be, we want to make sure that they can get a quote on the app, and then we want to make sure that they can make a claim in the app. And they lose the focus about, is that really what your customer wants at the end of the day? I mean, it can be, based on unvalidated assumptions about what customers actually need and what they want and what they're asking for. So they're developing tools, digital tools, but are not necessarily what customers have been asking for. And even beyond that, maybe that's not what employees actually want either. I mean, you can spark resistance in your contact center, in your branch, with your agents. So we've been talking a lot about digital transformation, how in financial services, so in banking, in insurance, customers expectations and are reshaped because they start using mobile apps, kind of the website, etc. And obviously this is changing, the way people are banking or dealing with their insurance products. But what we're seeing as well is that it's got an impact on how actually customers are increasingly using multiple channels and multiple touch points to do their finances. And this is the case outside financial services, but this kind of rise of cross-touch points behavior is happening also in financial services. So these are data for Europe. So we're seeing currently like 7% of banking customers, online adults, banking customers that use branch banking, online banking, mobile banking on a monthly basis, right? So at least once a month. And we're talking about 20% in the US because in America they tend to use the branch a bit more. And why am I talking about that? Well, it's because we're seeing an increase in the number of customers that are cross touch points, like intrinsically. But these cross touch point interactions very often are either broken or of a poor experience. So customers are moving from one touch point to another to do their banking, to get customer service, to get financial advice. But what's happening is that if you're looking how the organization is structured, how the team works together, actually the people managing the websites don't really talk to the people who are looking after the app, completely disconnected, or they don't even know the people actually working on the branch side of things. And these people might not know the people who are developing the new chatbot. So every touch point is designed in isolation. I talk to the contact center team and they tell me, I actually don't know exactly what they're doing on the digital side because that's a different channel. Is it a different channel? I mean, like for your customers, it's the same bank, right? It's just like one, or it should be one seamless organization. And this is not just happening in terms of channels, this is happening in terms of communication. So the customer might want to start an interaction with a bank in the website with the web chats, but then he might be transferred to the contact center. And again, because you still have these silos, the communication is not completely seamless. So lots of kind of disconnects between the different touch points. The problem is that customers, even like banking customers or policy holders, they're now used to have a different kind of experience when they're dealing with companies or startups outside financial services. I mean, if you're thinking about getting a cab, so let's talk about Uber or Lyft. It's not just about getting a cab. It's actually being able to use your smartphone to get a cab, but to be able also to track the car, to be able to make the payments, to be able to do that from any devices. The same customer might expect something very different from, or actually similar, when he's dealing with his insurer. Things about like roadside assistance, for example, right? So the expectations are there. They're bringing these high expectations from one industry to the next. They don't understand the fact that, if you call the contact center, the person on the phone says, well, actually, like that, you're going to have to tell me what you've been doing on the website because I don't have that information. Because like all the kind of interactional data is lost. Like, it's kind of like on the trail. So customers demand consistent and contextual experiences, and increasingly, they're asking that kind of consistency from their financial services providers. So the pace of change is actually accelerating, right? I'm talking about the age of a customer, but we are in the age of a customer, and it's exponential. Customers are going to expect more and more in terms of the quality of the customer experience they're getting, but also the consistency. And what we're seeing is that everybody's talking about digital. I mean, this morning we're talking about what do we mean by digital transformation. I think it means different things to different companies. Again, some companies are going to be very tactical. It's still very much about the touch points. It's still very much about the technology. And the leaders are far beyond that. What they're thinking about is actually using, like creating and exploiting digital assets, not just to improve the customer experience on the front ends, but actually using that to bring agility and to boost operational agility. To bring like operational agility, but also bringing like flexibility, the way they're doing things, the way they're going to change what's happening in the back end. But all that is driven by customer obsession, putting the customer at the center of what they're doing. So when we talk about a customer-obsessed enterprise, what we're talking about is a company that focuses its strategy, its operations, its budgets on processes that enhance knowledge and engagement with the customers. So I want to show you what we call the customer-obsessed operational model. I think it's a very good way to look at how these leaders are actually thinking differently, but the way they're trying to not just deliver on the front end, but also thinking about what they need to do at an operational level in order to service their customers better. So the leaders are moving from what we say like being customer aware, so having information about the customer, knowing who the customer is, to being customer led. So that means like it's not just about collecting information, it's actually making sure that this information, so it can be structured data, unstructured data, you're collecting that information, but you use that information to be able to provide marketing, to provide content, to provide services that actually meet the needs of your customers. They're moving from being data-rich to insights-driven. What we mean by that is that, yes, we're swamped with data, but it's one thing to be able to say, okay, like we have a lot of data and actually being able to manage that data. So are you able to aggregate that data? Are you able to store it? Are you able to make sense of it? Are you able to use these insights to improve your software so that you can actually serve customers in real time with the information, the contents, the services they need? It's also about moving from being perfect to being fast. I think this is quite important because I think there's a number of still executives that are still quite, I would say, like limited by making sure they're doing the right thing, that the solution they were going to come up with is like bulletproof. And you need to move away from that. You need to make sure that the customer is changing. The market is rapidly changing as well. So you need to be able, if you want to win these customers, you need to be able to move faster as well and bring things to the market faster. So it's about being able to leave behind the ideal bulletproof solution and to bring something to the market that then you kind of implement and fine-tune and make better. And it's also about moving from being siloed to being connected. So that means different things. I mean, in the first place, I think that how you're working internally. I mean, we're talking about, especially in financial services, the problem with these silos and the data being in the silos, the problem of the legacy systems with different systems not talking to each other, and that, that's a problem you have in the front end when things in the back end are completely disconnected. So companies have to work harder at being able to have the system talking to each other so that the experience that the customer is getting in the front end is much more consistent and makes sense. So using API, for example, is a way to do that. But I think it's also about changing the mindset about how you're developing new digital capabilities as a company. I think until recently, especially in financial services, companies wanted to build everything internally. They have their own developers, they can do it themselves. And I think increasingly, they realize that if you want to move faster, to be able to respond to the market changes, you need to be faster in developing these capabilities. And that means collaborating. That means understanding that you need to work as part of an ecosystem. So collaborating, partnering, and plugging in capabilities so that you can bring things to the market faster. So I want to bring some examples to illustrate, because until now it sounds very theoretical. I've been doing a lot of work with Analyst on the CX team. So I'm basically part of the digital business strategy team. We also have CX analysts at Forrester. And I think it's very important at this stage to understand that if you want to be a leader in that digital transformation, you need to talk to what's happening on the CX side. You need to work with your CX colleague. And you need to take a leaf from their playbook. So I've been working a lot on how even on the digital side, companies should use things like customer journeys and customer journey mapping, because that's the only way you can focus on the customer and making sure that what you're doing, what you're trying to implement, what you're trying to design is really taking into consideration the customer and the customer life cycle, like from one point to the next. I think that will help companies deliver customer focus and this outside-in perspective. The problem in the company is that you're going to have on the one side the lines of business, and you have marketing, that you have tech management, and you have UX. And I think the customer journey exercise is a very good way to align all these stakeholders behind like a unique vision for the company. So working cross-functionally, like we're seeing a number of banks today and insurance companies working with customer journey mapping. They bring all these people in the same room to work on the same customer journey. So you're getting away from the focus on the product. You focus on the customer experience. What is your customer trying to do? This is very important because I think that's the only way that you can actually improve digital and cross-channel customer experiences. Because until now, what we've seen is like all these digital touch points, they're being designed, they're being implemented in a very kind of siloed way. And what companies are trying to do today is making sure that they make this transition from one point to the next, a better experience. You cannot do that if you develop your digital touch points in isolation from each other. So using that methodology is a very good way to bring all these people in the same room and doing that together. And I had this question this morning about the role of the CIO or a CTO in that process. Interestingly, I think leaders at the moment, what they're doing is that they bring people from tech management to the kind of earliest meetings they have when they start talking about these customer journeys. I know there was a session on GDPR. It's the same. They bring compliance, legal. Like these teams need to be part of a journey. They need to be part of a discussion. They need to be at the table. And then working with customer journeys is a very good way to inform the business technology agenda. So as I said, you bring in people from the tech management side, but it's not just that. I think it's a very good way also to build a business case for investment in business technology. You need to show, how this is going to work, like going forward. But you need to start with small projects. You need to show, some results, and then you build up and you add other customer journeys. So a number of examples. I was talking to Bank Zachodni, so this is a bank in Poland. And they use customer journey mapping to, as I said, reframe the discussion around the customer. And it's very interesting because what they're doing is, by doing that, they're trying to pull data from different channels, but also different ways. So we use ethnography, they use customer surveys, they get data coming from the contact center, coming from web analytics. They aggregate the data and they feed that data into the customer journeys. And if you're looking at the slide, they even input all the more kind of qualitative, even kind of emotional data. So they're able to tell, when the customer, this is the customer journey for the account opening, they're able to tell, at the different stages of the account opening, how the customer is feeling. So remember earlier I was talking about emotion. So they factor in the fact that, customer can have a good experience at some point and then it's getting worse. And so where are the pain points? And using that data, you're able to tell, where the customer is having a good experience and where the customer is actually, having a kind of crappy experience. And what is super interesting, I think, with the kind of exercise they're doing is that they don't, because I think the problem with customer journeys is sometimes you create a customer journey map and then it's a very static thing. It's like, oh, this is a customer journey map. What do we do with it? Customer journey maps are dynamic tools, right? I mean, you know that your customers are changing very rapidly. So you need to be able to collect data on a regular basis, feed that data into the customer journey map, and see that this is a very dynamic tool. This is going to change as your customers are changing. So if you're working with customer journey mapping, you need to be able to feed all the data that you're getting into that customer journey and as you're going progressively. How many people in the room are using customer journey methodology in their company? Right. How many people here would say that the company then is customer-centric? Okay, But it's fine. I mean, like I've done that with a series of interviews that was kind of last year. And to be honest, I think it's a beginning. And even the definition of what is the customer journey is quite interesting. I would say, like, the problem when you start working with customer journeys is that there are hundreds of customer journeys that you could work on. So the question very usually I get is, that I'm asking is like, how do you pick your customer journeys? Which one do you work on? Interestingly, what I hear on the banking side very often is like, well, we want to know, the path to purchase, right? Because it generates revenue. So we start with really complex, long customer journeys, like mortgage, for example. You have to think about, yes, your business objectives, but also the kind of the customer objectives, right? It's like, what is it that the customer is trying to do? If you start with like a massive customer journey, like the mortgage, it's very difficult to test the methodology. It's maybe easier for insurers. So this is Nationwide Mutual. What they did, they took the claim journey, which is obviously something they want to get right because that's a kind of moment of truth in insurance companies. And what is interesting is like when you start mapping the journey, initially you think, okay, there might be kind of like 4 or 5 phases. So they break the customer journeys in small phases. What they realize when they start doing the mapping and the exercise is that actually you have maybe 10, 12, 20, 25 pain points in that journey. So it's a very good way to, first of all, understand where are these pain points. So for example, in the case of a claim journey, it can be, that you want to make the claim, but then, it can be that you want to schedule an appraisal, that you want to have an estimate for repairs. There's a number of things that the company doesn't necessarily think about. And it's the same in banking. I had like executives telling me, we started a customer journey, and then we realized it's so big, like we cannot handle it. So they broke the customer journey. We're looking at macro, what we call like macro customer journey. Things like, okay, maybe the customer is just trying to call the bank because there's been a problem with his cards. That's a customer journey, rather than trying to open an account or get a mortgage. So I was telling you earlier in the customer-obsessed operating model that companies are also trying to go from being perfect to being fast. And this is Lloyds Banking Group. They adopted as part of their digital transformation, they adopted the new kind of 4-phase design and delivery process. So this is really based on design thinking principles. So what they do is, you can see here, there's a first phase where they try to understand the customer, which is really important, working with empathy maps. Again, trying to understand what is it that the customer is trying to do and put yourself in the shoes of the customer. Then you have a second phase, which is the incubation phase. So this is where you're trying to get ideas, maybe from different industries, trying to understand, what else you can do, how you can improve what you have already, but trying to think a bit outside the box. In the third phase, which is the building phase, this is where you try to come up with a pilot or like an MVP, and you kind of like go through different, so you can call them scrums, you can call them sprints, sessions, so different work streams so that you iterate to come up with a solution that you can then launch to market. So it might be an MVP. What you're doing in the fourth phase, which is the optimization phase, is that you measure what you're doing and you optimize. And this is a very good way to make sure that you move faster. And that also you can test what you're doing. Because the problem, again, as I said, your customers are changing. You want to make sure that you can improve what you're doing, but keeping the voice of the customer as you're doing it. Understand how you can improve, taking into consideration what your customers are trying to do, what works, what doesn't work, what they might want to see. Maybe sometimes they don't even know, what they want from you. So this is a very good way to test your solutions with a customer. And again, this is applying to banking, but this is something you can apply to any industry. And why this is so important, and I think that's where we're seeing, especially when we're talking to leaders in the industry, is that they stop focusing on the set of products and services. What they focus on is actually the outcome. What is it that customers are trying to achieve? Going back to customer experience. It's not about the products, it's about your customers' outcomes, what they want to do. And in order to be able to do that, to shift from a focus on the product to a focus on the customer experience, you need to be able to move from a state where you feel you have lots of data, what do we do with this data, to actually being insights-driven. There's a number of banks that are working on that. So that's what I mean by being customer-obsessed, is that they've been talking to their customers, asking them, what do you want? Macquarie Bank is a very good example. It's a bank in Australia. And when I talked to the CDO, who's actually also the chief architect, so two hats, which is quite interesting, what he was telling me is, like, initially they started the digital transformation trying to understand what is it our customers want. So lots of customer surveys, asking the customer, try to imagine, to think really big, what would you want from your bank? And the customers were like, well, we want to actually be able to interact with you, ask questions in a very natural way, the way we would do when we go to the branch and talk to a relationship manager. The problem is that they're asking for insights. Like, for example, I want to know how much I spent on trips to London over the past 2 years, and I want to see all the transactions with all the details. You go to the tech management side and say, how can we surface all this information? That's going to be very difficult. So, we need to find a way to do it. But the problem is Macquarie, like lots of banks, they have all these back-end systems that don't necessarily talk to each other. So it is actually very difficult in the state of things. So Iguina, who is the CDO, said, well, I think what we need to work on is making sure that we can aggregate all this data we have, making sure that we have a repository where we've got all this information coming. So that triggered a discussion for the launch of what they call the Smart Data Project, which is basically a data lake. So, he suggested building that CX layer on top of the legacy systems, aggregates the data in that platform, but it's not just like a data warehouse. This is actually where all the kind of like machine learning algorithms sit. That's where all the smart decision making is taking place. And this is what you need if tomorrow you want to be able to use natural language processes, if you want to launch a chatbot, if you want to use predictive analytics. But you need to have that layer in place. You need to have that data in one place to be able to do that. And then I was also talking about how leaders are moving from being siloed to being connected. So it's really about re-envisioning your business as part of your customer's personal value ecosystem. What I mean by that is that your customers already, in order to have, basically to get solutions, to get products, what they need, is that they're already organizing this ecosystem for themselves. They're already, working with different companies in order to get what they want. I think leaders are the companies that are going to be able to understand what is their role as part of that ecosystem. If I look at, this is Vitality, it's a health and life insurer. What they did is that they created that ecosystem of partners. So they're basically working, they have these kinds of digital partnerships with these companies that the customer is already working with. So what they're doing is that they created this wellness, we could call it like wellness platform, in order to help customers, trying to help them being healthier, but also providing rewards for being healthier. So the customers link their like Fitbit or the devices that track their activity, their loyalty program, and they get rewarded for having like a healthier lifestyle. Very interestingly for the insurer, it's a very good way to use customer activity data in order to provide more personalized benefits. And this is a very good way to engage customers and to increase loyalty. So it's a win-win. Another good way to moving from being siloed to being connected is what a number of banks are doing right now, which is in anticipation of PSD2, so the regulation in Europe, to increase competition in the financial services industry. They're anticipating, and rather than seeing open banking as a threat, they're actually using that as a business opportunity. We're trying to understand how they can use open banking, so opening the APIs, working with developers, fintech companies that are going to use the transactional data from the customer to offer new services, new solutions. So that is boosting innovation in financial services, but I think it's also a very good strategy on the banking side, on the bank side, to improve what they're doing and to make sure that they're moving faster and also, being more effectively competitive in the markets. This is BBVA in Spain, and interestingly, when I get the questions around, what do you need to put in place in order to be like a leader in terms of digital transformation? BBVA has been working on their digital transformation for like 10 years. So this is a long journey. But if you're looking at what they're doing, they're kind of always like a step further in terms of what they're developing in terms of touch points, but also what they're doing in the back end to move faster. So customer obsession is, I would say, not just something you're doing on the surface. It actually drives a complete business transformation. You have to keep in mind that it's not just about customer experience, it's actually about delivering also operational agility and making sure that it's not just about the customer experience you're giving to your users, but also thinking about how do we become excellent in terms of what we're doing on the operational side in order to serve these customers. So it's really about a operational reset. And there's a number of things that you need to work on in order to become a digital leader or even a digital business yourself. Obviously, it has to do with, on the banking side, the core banking that you want to work on, but it's also about your systems of insights and the architecture that enables that. It's about your systems of engagement. It's about what you're going to do in terms of AI or, experimenting with some of these new technologies as you go forward in order to personalize what you're doing for customers. So when I talk about personalization, I think what is important to remember is that what we're looking is what's happening in the financial services industry. We're talking about digital disruption. And I think there's no argument, there's no question that we will always need a financial services provider. I think what's more unclear is what is going to be the role of traditional insurers, of traditional banks in the future. And this is where personalization is coming, because I think you need to differentiate yourself in the market. In order to do that, you need to transform digitally. So it's going to be a long journey. I think the question is more about, as Brian said this morning, about getting the sense of urgency and not postponing what you're doing. It's step after step, and I encourage you to take small step, but to move on and to kind of move the needle if you want to not be part of the laggards. So I leave you with that, and thank you very much for listening.